17-year-old Maya Ellison was never supposed to be in that room, an elite university lecture hall where centuries of exclusion still lingered in the silence. Invited to observe, not to participate, Maya stuns an entire graduate seminar when she's dared to solve an impossible math problem in front of a skeptical professor and an even more skeptical class. But what begins as a moment of quiet defiance becomes a storm that ripples through academia, media, and culture itself. The new equation is a gripping, emotionally charged story about brilliance, racism, resistance, and the seismic power of refusing to shrink. If you like the video and subscribe to the channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. The envelope didn't look like much. Off-white, slightly crumpled at the edges, and marked with a smudge of black ink like it had passed through a dozen different mailrooms. Maya Ellison stared at it over her bowl of instant oatmeal, spoon frozen halfway to her mouth. Her name was typed neatly on the front. Miss Maya Ellison, Eastwood High School, Detroit, Michigan. No return address. No familiar school district logo. Just a gold-embossed university seal she didn't recognize at first. She didn't open it right away. Her mother was rushing around the kitchen, trying to find her keys, talking half to Maya, half to herself, and completely oblivious to the weight in her daughter's hand. The envelope felt too official, too heavy for a Monday. By the time Maya finally slid it open with a butter knife and unfolded the thick cardstock inside, her stomach had flipped over. Twice. The Office of Academic Outreach at Alden Ridge University is pleased to invite Miss Maya Ellison to participate in our advanced seminar program in theoretical mathematics, hosted on campus this fall. This program offers select students nationwide the opportunity to audit real university-level seminars and interact with faculty and graduate researchers in a formal academic setting. She blinked. Then again. Was this real? Maya had heard of Alden Ridge. Everyone had, at least in certain circles. It was one of those elite Northeastern institutions people mentioned with quiet reverence, like it was more myth than place. The kind of school where equations were named after professors who had taught there. The kind of school that had never recruited from Eastwood High, a place where half the lockers didn't lock and substitute teachers were more common than textbooks. But there it was, her name in black ink right under the Alden Ridge seal. The signature at the bottom read Dr. Walter A. Kiernan, Director of Theoretical Mathematics and recipient of the Fields Medal. A living legend in the math world. Maya had read about him last year during a late-night rabbit hole after solving a particularly nasty vector proof. She never thought she'd hear his name again. By the time her mother finally noticed Maya was no longer eating, she'd read the letter 3 times. "You okay, baby?" her mom asked, finally stilling. "You look like you saw a ghost." Maya looked up. I just got invited to Alden Ridge. Like, to go there. This fall. Kind of." Her mom frowned, taking the letter and squinting at the serif font like it might rearrange itself into something more familiar. "Alden Ridge? That fancy one in New York?" Maya nodded. Her mom pursed her lips, half in pride, half in suspicion. "They giving you money for this?" "It's not that kind of program," Maya said quickly. "It's just a seminar series. I'd be auditing a real math class. With grad students. It's not an admission offer or anything, just exposure. And they'll cover travel and housing for the weekends I'm there." Her mother looked up slowly. "So let me get this straight. They're flying you out, on their dime, to teach them something?" Maya cracked a rare smile. "Not exactly. I'm supposed to learn from them. But maybe." Truth was, she didn't fully understand why they'd picked her. Sure, she aced every test. Sure, she'd submitted a few regional math competition entries. But she wasn't a prodigy. She didn't have private tutors or AP classes or access to high-end labs. Everything she knew, she taught herself late at night with YouTube lectures and dusty library books. She worked at the corner store 3 evenings a week to help cover rent. She didn't feel like someone a place like Alden Ridge would even see. But someone had. And that was enough. Later that day in the school library, she found a dusty Dell laptop and Googled everything she could about the program. There wasn't much online. It was invitation only, no application, no public syllabus. The few mentions she found were in academic blogs and niche STEM forums. One article described it as a proving ground for gifted students, on the margins. Another called it token optics dressed as opportunity. Maya didn't care what they called it. If they gave her a seat at the table, even a folding chair at the edge, she was going to take it. Still, as she clicked through grainy photos of Aldenridge's snow-dusted campus and read interviews with Dr. Kiernan, a creeping unease settled over her excitement. She knew how these rooms looked. She knew what it felt like to walk into a space where no one expected you to belong, where your presence felt like an intrusion rather than an invitation. She also knew how to keep her head down, eyes sharp, and mouth shut until the numbers spoke for themselves. As the school bell rang and students poured into the hallway, Maya folded the letter neatly and slid it into her backpack. She didn't tell anyone. Not her teachers. Not her friends. Not yet. She didn't need a cheer squad. She didn't need a parade. She just needed 10 minutes. And when the time came, she was going to be ready. The lecture hall smelled like dust, old chalk, and cold air. The kind that had never fully warmed even in fall. Its ceiling stretched high, domed and crowned with ancient molding that curled like brittle ivory. Long windows filtered in gray morning light. It should have felt majestic. To Maya Ellison, it felt like stepping into a room built to keep people like her out. She stood just inside the doorway, backpack still slung over one shoulder. Her coat was damp from the drizzle outside. A security guard had directed her here after checking her student ID twice, like he didn't quite believe she belonged on this campus. She'd arrived early, on purpose, but the room was already half full, humming with quiet conversation and the rustle of papers. Every row was packed with students older than her, 20-somethings in hoodies, plaid flannels, and wire-rimmed glasses. Some had laptops open. Others were scribbling notes in leather-bound notebooks. All of them looked like they belonged. No one looked up when she walked in. She scanned the room quickly. The back corner, far left, was mostly empty. She made her way there, kept her head down, and took the seat nearest the wall. It was safer to observe than to be observed. The blackboard at the front was already filled with dense equations from a previous lecture, white chalk flowing across the dark green surface like tangled ivy. She stared at the symbols, letting her mind begin the slow work of parsing them. Partial differentials, matrix transformations, a strange notation she hadn't seen before. She felt that familiar flicker of excitement, the kind only math could spark in her. The noise in the room hushed suddenly. A man stepped in from a side door with a kind of unhurried confidence that didn't need to announce itself. Tall, silver-haired, and dressed in an immaculate navy suit, Dr. Walter Kiernan walked with a slight limp, one hand resting on the edge of the lectern as he scanned the hall. Maya recognized him instantly. She'd seen his photo on the university site, younger, smiling stiffly with the president of some European academy. But here, in real life, he looked heavier, sharper, and older, like someone who had spent decades battling unsolvable problems and won more often than not. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't greet the class. Instead, he turned to the blackboard, picked up a piece of fresh chalk, and drew a single, bold line under the mess of equations already there. Then, with a calm voice that cut clean through the silence, he said, "Today we're going to revisit an old friend, one you've all heard of but none of you will solve." A few students chuckled. He continued, writing in tall block letters. "The Caldwell conjecture." A hush fell over the room. Maya's heart skipped. She had read about it late one night, buried in a Reddit thread about unsolved mathematical problems. The conjecture dated back to 1874, proposed by an eccentric British logician named Aldous Caldwell. It involved a seemingly simple statement about the distribution of primes and recursive sequences. Something that sounded innocent until you tried to prove it. Entire doctoral theses had collapsed against it. It had no counterexamples and no formal proof. Just endless attempts and elegant failures. Dr. Kiernan turned, chalk still in hand. "Some of you have danced around this in abstract number theory. Others have avoided it entirely, smartly. I won't waste your time pretending anyone in this room will solve it." Another ripple of laughter, this one more nervous. Then he paused, eyes scanning the students. And then he stopped. Right on Maya. "Except maybe our guest." Maya froze. Every head turned toward her. "Miss Ellison, is it?" She swallowed hard. Nodded. "You're our high school invitee, correct?" Another nod. She forced her voice up from somewhere deep in her chest. "Yes, sir." Dr. Kiernan tilted his head slightly, something unreadable flickering in his expression. "Then let's have a little fun." He stepped back from the board, gesturing toward the equation like a magician revealing the final card in a trick. "Care to take a stab at it?" Laughter bubbled up again, scattered, uncertain, but present. Maya's ears rang. She couldn't tell if this was a challenge, a joke, or a test of how well she could fold under pressure. Her stomach twisted. She felt the weight of 100 eyes on her skin. But something inside her refused to flinch. She sat back slowly, her voice calm when she finally spoke. Maybe. If you don't mind me taking a closer look. Dr. Kiernan raised an eyebrow. Be my guest. He stepped aside. And the room went silent again as Maya Ellison stood, slung her backpack off, and began the long walk to the front of the lecture hall. The hardwood floor groaned softly beneath Maya's sneakers as she walked toward the board, eyes fixed straight ahead. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but her face stayed still, stoic, unreadable. She had long ago learned how to wear that mask, especially in rooms like this. Behind her, someone whispered, "She's just a high schooler." Another voice replied, low but audible, "They're just doing this for PR. Watch her crash." She kept walking. When she reached the front, the board towered above her. The symbols glared back, taunting, proud. The Caldwell conjecture, in all its pristine arrogance, like it had been waiting for centuries just to mock her too. Dr. Kiernan stood a few feet away, arms folded, the ghost of a smirk on his lips. "Take your time," he said, tone polite but condescending. "But do remember, brilliance often fades under pressure." He turned back toward the class like this was already over. Maya said nothing. She stepped up to the chalk tray and picked up a stick with her right hand. It felt brittle, fragile, the kind that would snap if she gripped it too tightly. She took a deep breath. Behind her, the murmurs resumed. The snickers. The rustling of phones being raised under desks. She could feel their eyes on her, watching not to learn but to witness the moment she failed. Not just because she was young. Not just because she was unknown. But because she was black. She had felt it in the hallway earlier, when a TA asked if she was here to clean. She had seen it in the professor's double take when he first looked at her name. She had heard it in the laughter just moments ago, soaked in disbelief and the certainty that someone like her could never belong up there. But she wasn't here to belong. She was here to prove that she didn't have to. Maya stared at the conjecture again. Her mind slipped into motion, filtering through patterns, alternate forms, counterexamples, structures she'd built in her head across years of solitude and silent study. She didn't just know math. She lived it. She saw it in symmetry, rhythm, heat, silence. Numbers were her second language, one they hadn't colonized. She began writing. Slowly at first, then faster. Variables flowed across the board, each one deliberate, each symbol precise. Her hand moved with the confidence of someone who wasn't just guessing, but remembering a truth she'd known all along. She introduced a matrix transformation no one in the room had expected. She bent modular arithmetic into a recursive identity, something she'd only ever jotted in the margins of her sketchbook at home. Lines curved into elegant logic. The chalk snapped once, but she didn't flinch. She grabbed another and kept going. The room had gone quiet again. But it was no longer the silence of mockery. It was the kind of silence that pressed inward, collective, sharp-edged. Something was happening, something no one could interrupt without admitting they were wrong. Dr. Kiernan stepped forward slightly, brow furrowed. His arms had uncrossed. One of the grad students near the front leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes darting over the steps. From the back row came a whisper, "Wait, she's not just—" 10 minutes passed. When Maya placed the chalk down, her heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was adrenaline. Not the high of victory. Not yet. But the clarity of knowing she hadn't backed down. She stepped away from the board. "That's not a complete proof," she said clearly for the room to hear. "But it's a partial reduction with some paths worth checking. You'll find the recursive identity collapses the second-tier assumption." I highlighted it in red. She turned toward Dr. Kiernan, who was now walking slowly toward the board, eyes scanning each line. "You introduced symmetry in base 10 expansion," he murmured. "You jumped the sequence without explicit constraint, but it holds." He trailed off. Maya folded her arms. Behind her, the silence now carried something new. Not approval, disruption. She could feel it like static on her skin. This was not the script they'd written in their heads. The girl who was supposed to stumble had instead cracked the foundation. The student from the public school, from Detroit, from the wrong box on their form, had just made them all pause. She didn't expect applause. She didn't want it. But what she saw on their faces, uncertainty, discomfort, the first ripples of respect grudgingly forming, was enough. Dr. Kiernan finally looked at her, but the smirk was gone. "You may have something here," he said quietly. "You may have more than that." Maya didn't blink. "I know," she replied. Then she turned, walked back to her seat and left the chalk dust behind her. Maya's footsteps echoed louder than they should have as she returned to her seat. The auditorium hadn't changed, but everything inside it had. She slid into the chair at the end of the back row, her hands calm, her posture steady. But inside her muscles were wired tight. 10 minutes. That's all she'd had to carve out a sliver of truth in a room that never expected her to even speak. Now they didn't know what to say. Dr. Kiernan was still at the front, silent, staring at the board. He hadn't erased anything. The rows of chalk equations glowed under the overhead lights, her handwriting distinct from his, tighter, more compact, like it didn't trust the board to hold it. In the third row, a tall white grad student in a Yale hoodie leaned over to whisper to a peer. Maya didn't hear it, but she didn't need to. The body language was enough. A scoff, a shake of the head, the kind of grin that says this won't last. They think it's a fluke. They think it's luck. They think she copied it from somewhere. They always do. Maya pulled her hoodie tighter over her braids. She didn't respond. That was the game. They bait you, try to make you feel like an imposter, like you have to defend your right to even stand near the board. She had played this game before. In math club competitions where judges double-checked her solutions but not the white boy next to her. In classrooms where her teachers called her articulate, like it was a surprise. At the grocery store where she got followed every time she wore sweats and a backpack. She knew what this was. The difference now was, she'd just flipped their equation inside out. Dr. Kiernan turned to the class slowly. "Well," he said, voice clipped. "It appears Miss Ellison has, in 10 minutes, constructed a partial reduction of Caldwell's sequence model that, if it holds, collapses one of the conjecture's primary conditions." Maya kept her eyes forward. No smile. No reaction. A few students looked stunned. One, Asian, glasses sliding down his nose, was already reworking her steps in his notebook. A girl near the window typed furiously on her laptop, probably trying to cross-reference it against published papers. Then a voice cut through the silence. She must have seen this somewhere. The words came from the middle of the auditorium, crisp, dismissive. It was the grad student in the Yale hoodie. He didn't bother to make eye contact. He just leaned back in his chair like he dropped a fact, not a provocation. "I mean, with all due respect," he added, the phrase that always came before something disrespectful. "A problem like this doesn't fall in 10 minutes unless it's been solved already. And I doubt a high schooler from a Detroit public school just cracked it cold." A few people nodded, not overtly but subtly, quietly. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Maya felt the words land. Not just at her but through her. She'd been prepared for skepticism. But this wasn't just about math. It never was. It was about who was allowed to be brilliant. Who was allowed to shock people. And more importantly, who wasn't. Dr. Kiernan raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed by the interruption. But he didn't defend her. Not really. "It's not a complete solution," he said. "But it's novel. And I'll remind you, some of the greatest breakthroughs come from unexpected places." Maya didn't wait to be defended. She stood up again. Calmly. Fully. Like she had all the time in the world. "You think I cheated?" she said, her voice sharp enough to pierce the walls. The room turned. "You think I memorized it from some secret database? That I faked an entire identity transform and pivot reduction just to impress people who laughed when I stood up?" The student in the Yale hoodie sat back, blinking. He wasn't expecting her to talk back. Maya walked to the edge of the aisle. "This isn't a science fair project. It's not a party trick. It's something I've been working on since I was 15. Every night. After my shift. After homework. With no help, no mentor, no institution. Just a cheap notebook and a lot of silence." She stopped. "Let it sink in. 10 minutes on your board was just the part you saw." And with that she sat back down. This time the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Even the professor had nothing to add. The chalkboard hadn't been touched. 15 minutes had passed since Maya's last word. Dr. Kiernan hadn't erased a thing. The board remained covered in her proof fragments, her symbols, her red chalk highlights, still glowing under the classroom's yellow lights like fresh wounds. No one spoke. Not because they didn't have questions. Not because they didn't want to challenge her. But because no one knew how to go first. The kind of silence that had once been directed at her had now shifted around her. Maya sat quietly in the back row, her expression unreadable, her hoodie still pulled low. She didn't tap her pen. She didn't fidget. She simply waited. But inside her thoughts raced. Her body hummed with the residual fire of confrontation, and beneath that, the ache of something far more familiar, exhaustion. She'd learned over the years that silence wasn't always safety. Sometimes it was judgment. Sometimes it was fear. And sometimes it was strategy. But right now silence was power. Kiernan finally cleared his throat. Miss Ellison's approach merits further analysis. I'll be reviewing it myself over the coming week. For those of you who wish to understand what just happened, I suggest you start by brushing up on transformation invariance and sequence recurrence collapse theory. Her logic is unconventional, but mathematically sound, at least preliminarily. He glanced once more at the board, then back at her. There was something new in his expression now, not warmth, not admiration, but respect edged with discomfort. Like she'd pulled the ground out from under a system he'd spent his life standing on. We'll continue next session, he said curtly, already packing up his notes. Students began gathering their things slowly, quietly. Maya could feel the way they moved now, how they stole glances at her, how they didn't speak directly to her but whispered in fragments. Is she published? Who even invited her? It's probably a coincidence. One lucky trick. And then, she made him stop talking. No one spoke to her directly. No one offered a handshake. No one said good work. They looked at her like she was a storm they hadn't predicted, and now weren't sure how to survive. But one girl on her way out paused near Maya's row. She was brown-skinned, her hijab lavender, her notebook clasped tightly in both hands. She didn't say anything, just nodded once. Maya nodded back. It was enough. As the last of the students trickled out, Maya stood and slipped her backpack over her shoulder. She was halfway to the door when she heard the voice behind her. Miss Ellison. Dr. Kiernan. She turned. He was standing near the board, hands in his coat pockets, eyes narrowed slightly. You're not enrolled, he said. You're not even supposed to be in a formal problem-set environment. This was unscripted. I know, Maya replied. You embarrassed one of my top fellows. Publicly. He embarrassed himself. Dr. Kiernan's eyes twitched just slightly. Then for the first time he smiled. It was small. Tired. You've made quite a mess, you know. Maya shrugged. Mess is what happens when you sweep things under the rug too long. Kiernan looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. Come back next week, he said. I'll clear it with the board. Maya didn't move. Why? She asked. Because I shocked everyone? No, he said. Because you might be right. And for the first time all day, Maya allowed herself the smallest smile. I know, she said again. As she stepped out of the lecture hall, the air hit her like fresh water, cool, stinging and bracing. The courtyard outside was empty, the cobblestones still slick from that morning's rain. The university's clock tower loomed in the distance, its white spire piercing the clouded sky. Maya pulled her hood back. Let the drizzle hit her face. For once, the silence around her didn't feel like erasure. It felt like the pause before the world had to change. By the time Maya got home Sunday evening, the storm had already begun. It started with a blurry photo. Someone in the lecture hall had snapped a picture of her at the chalkboard, standing in front of the Caldwell conjecture, red chalk midstroke, her expression razor-focused. The caption read, High school student walks into grad-level seminar and dismantles a 150-year-old math problem in 10 minutes. Professor Kiernan speechless. It hit Twitter first, then Reddit. Then the slow churn of academic blogs and STEM forums where credentials were currency and gatekeeping was ritual. Most of the comments were skeptical. Publicity stunt. There's no way a kid from Detroit cracked Caldwell. She probably copied it from someone's unpublished thesis. But not all. A few anonymous users with math PhDs started breaking down the partial proof from the visible parts of the chalkboard in the photo. One comment thread on a private forum went viral for detailing how Maya had used a nonlinear recurrence pivot that hadn't appeared in any known literature. Another user claimed her third step mirrored an unpublished draft from a European research group, except hers was simpler. By Monday, Aldenridge's inbox was flooded. By Tuesday, reporters were calling Maya's high school. Her phone blew up with blocked numbers and voicemails. We'd love to feature you in our Women in STEM series. Just a short video on your experience, nothing formal. Can you send us a headshot? Are you available for a quick interview on the impact of representation? Her mother tried to field the calls, but there were too many. By the third day, a local Detroit news crew showed up outside the apartment. Maya didn't open the door, because alongside the interviews came the other messages. Emails without names, just subject lines. You don't belong there. Stop pretending. Affirmative action puppet. Cheaters always get caught. Stay in your lane. Some of them were longer. More detailed. The kind of hate so specific you knew it had been waiting, just waiting for someone like her to rise too far, too fast. Her school counselor offered to help. We can prepare a press statement, she said gently. We want to support you, Maya. But Maya didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to do the math. On Thursday, Dr. Kiernan called. You're not safe, he said without preamble. I'm not surprised, she replied. They're going to pick apart every word of your work. Every variable. Every line. Good, she said. Let them try. There was a long pause. Then. You're being offered a fellowship. Full ride. We're skipping the red tape. Maya blinked. Wait, what? The board approved it this morning. Technically, it's for extraordinary mathematical contribution under special circumstances. But everyone here knows it's for you. You don't need to wait for graduation. You'd start this fall. Possibly earlier. Maya didn't answer right away, because she knew what this was. It wasn't just reward. It was containment. She had become uncontrollable, too visible to ignore, too disruptive to dismiss. So the institution did what institutions always do when someone broke their rules but couldn't be erased. They made room at the top just big enough for one. So I'd be their success story, she said. Their exception. No, Kiernan said. You'd be the start of their correction. That night, Maya sat at her window watching the city blur through the glass. Sirens passed in the distance. Neon lit up cracked concrete. Somewhere nearby, a boy laughed too loud and a dog barked at the echo. She wasn't afraid of the work. She wasn't even afraid of the scrutiny. What she feared, what she refused, was to be tokenized. If she was going to walk into Alden Ridge on a full ride, she'd do it on her terms. Not as a symbol. Not as a surprise. But as a mathematician. Let them brace for the storm. She had always been one. A month later, Maya Ellison returned to Alden Ridge. But this time she didn't sit in the back. She didn't wear her hoodie pulled low. She didn't walk fast with her head down. She didn't look for the nearest exit. When she entered the same ivory-walled lecture hall, her shoulders were square, her steps measured, her eyes calm. She walked like someone who had nothing to prove and no one to ask permission from. This time her name was on the roster. Officially. Alden Ridge had rushed the process. Waived requirements. Bypassed age restrictions. Bypassed everything. She was now the youngest student in the history of the mathematics department, on full scholarship, with a personal research fellowship and a dorm room with her name on the door. But she didn't care about any of that. What mattered more was that her name, Maya Ellison, was finally on the department website. Not as an intern. Not as a visitor. But as a researcher. Still, the room hadn't changed. The portraits still lined the walls, old white men in oil paint, staring down with stern faces and unyielding eyes. Men who had discovered theories, won medals, rewritten equations. Men who had once decided who was allowed to take a seat at the table. Maya stared at them as she walked down the front aisle. This time she took the second seat in the first row. Not the middle. Not the back. The second. It was strategic. She knew better than to sit dead center. Too aggressive. But not in the shadows either. She sat where everyone could see her, and where she could see everything. Dr. Kiernan walked in a few minutes later. He paused when he saw her, then gave the faintest nod. Today there was no chalkboard full of taunts. No impossible problem waiting to trap her. Just a lecture on complexity theory, and an audience that knew exactly who she was. Some of the graduate students still refused to make eye contact. Others were careful, too careful, smiling just a little too long, using her name a little too loudly, like saying Maya was proof they weren't threatened. But she didn't come for their approval. She came for the math. And for the seat. Because in places like Alden Ridge, seats were power. Where you sat was who you were. And if you didn't take your seat, someone else would take it for you, then spend the next 100 years pretending it had always been theirs. After class, a reporter waited outside. He wore a slick coat, expensive shoes, a press badge. He called her name politely. "Miss Ellison, just a moment?" She didn't stop. "Do you feel like a symbol?" he asked. "For diversity? For progress?" She did stop then. Not because she was interested, but because she was tired of being defined by everyone but herself. She turned to him. "I'm not a symbol," she said. "I'm the start of a pattern." Then she walked away. In the following weeks, Maya settled into her new role. She began working closely with Kiernan on refining her reduction. Some faculty resisted, treating her like a curiosity rather than a colleague. But one by one they came around, not because they wanted to, but because the math left them no other option. Her work spoke louder than they ever could. And word began to spread. At a STEM equity conference in D.C., her proof was cited as a paradigm shift. A black mathematician from Atlanta reached out, asking to collaborate. An all-girls robotics team from Chicago sent her a letter. "You make us feel like we belong here too." Maya read it alone in her dorm. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just nodded, folded the letter carefully, and placed it on the desk next to her red chalk. Because the seat she took wasn't just hers anymore. It was the beginning of a new equation. The equation had changed. Not just on paper. Not just in theory. But in the air. In the halls where Maya had once walked unnoticed, people now turned their heads. Some nodded with cautious respect. Others simply stared, unsure how to treat a girl who had walked into their fortress, rewritten one of its laws, and left the door ajar behind her. Her chalkboard, the one from that day, had been cleaned, then reassembled inside a glass case outside the mathematics department office. Not in the lobby. Not in the museum wing. But here in the main hallway where students passed every day. Framed in pale oak, the preserved proof glowed under carefully installed lighting, red chalk still visible in the lower left corner like a signature. At the bottom of the display in quiet brass letters it read, "Caldwell Conjecture, Partial Reduction. Maya Ellison, age 17. October 18, 2025. Reviewed and confirmed, Alden Ridge Mathematical Council." There was a time when they wouldn't have included her name. There was a time when they wouldn't have confirmed anything. But the world had changed. Or at least, it had blinked. And sometimes a blink was all it took to begin a shift. The emails never stopped. Professors from Brazil. Researchers from Germany. Black women mathematicians from South Africa, Oakland, Kingston. Even an elderly man from Kyoto sent her a hand-scrawled letter, praising her sequence logic with reverent detail and enclosing a centuries-old math text as a gift. "You showed us we'd stop trying," he wrote, "and reminded us what discovery still looks like." But the most meaningful letters came not from scholars, but from students. Girls in public schools. Boys in juvenile facilities. First-generation kids navigating academic systems that were never built for them. Teens who had stopped answering questions in class because they were tired of being side-eyed. Young people who looked at her and saw themselves, not as exceptions but as possibilities. One envelope arrived from Chicago, handwritten in bold purple ink. "Dear Maya, I'm in 8th grade. Our school showed us your story in math class. Everyone clapped. I never saw anyone who looked like me doing math on TV before. I didn't think I could. Now I do. P.S. I started learning proofs this weekend. I think you'd be proud." Maya folded that one carefully and taped it to the inside of her notebook. Not her math notebook. Her life notebook. By winter she had settled into something resembling routine. Classes in the morning. Research in the afternoon. In the evenings, she co-led a community mentorship program in the basement of the Alden Ridge Science Building. It was unofficial, barely funded, and constantly overbooked. She called it Code X, named after the unknown variable. 12 students came regularly, all from underserved districts around the state. One of them was Destiny, 12 years old, from the Bronx. Bright, fast, mouthy in the best way. She'd found Maya's photo on TikTok and tracked her down with help from a retired guidance counselor and 2 city librarians. "I want to do what you do," she had said on her first day, arms crossed. But faster. Now she sat beside Maya at a battered plastic table every week, flying through abstract algebra like it was playground math. "They say I talk too much," she mumbled once. "My teacher says I distract the room." Maya didn't hesitate. "That's what they say when they don't have the language for brilliance." Destiny grinned. "Then I must be fluent," One evening in February, Maya stayed late in the math building. Most of the campus was asleep. She wandered the main corridor, thinking, watching her breath rise in the cold hallway. That's when she saw it. A new frame. Hung on the far wall, opposite the oil paintings of Aldenridge's founders, sat a blank golden rectangle. It gleamed under a new spotlight, fresh brass beneath it, still unstained by fingerprints. The plaque read, 2025, present. Ongoing contribution. To be determined. No name. No title. Just space. Maya stared at it for a long time. At first she thought, this must be for me. Then she realized, it doesn't matter. The space wasn't hers. It wasn't anyone's. That blank frame was the equation. Open. Unsolved. Waiting. For destiny. For the girl writing her first theorem in a Bronx bedroom. For the boy building graphs in a Mississippi library after school. For the student who hadn't yet dared to raise their hand because the room wasn't ready, but they were. That frame wasn't a reward. It was an invitation. Outside, the snow fell in lazy spirals, covering the cobblestone paths in quiet white. The tower bells chimed midnight as Maya stepped into the cold. She looked up. She didn't feel small beneath the stars. She felt part of them. Part of something vast and difficult and beautiful. She pulled her coat tighter, adjusted the strap of her backpack and walked on. Because she wasn't done. And neither was the world. Because the equation had changed. And this time, it included her. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.